Welcome to Shahnameh, Book of Kings. Today we continue with the Reign of Hormozd. The sad incident of the chief priest put the whole country into a turmoil of distress. This bloodthirsty king, who was unworthy to sit on the throne, gave no thought to the evils that were to come. He prepared to shed more blood and decided to use Mehran-Setad for this purpose. At dead of night he summoned him, had him kneel before him, and said, "If you want to be safe, and never suffer because of my anger or irritation, when the sun rises tomorrow and makes the mountain tops glisten like armor, come with the nobles of Iran and stand before my throne. I will question you about Saveh. Make your heart pliant to my wishes when you answer. I will say, 'Who is this friend of yours? Is he evil, or is he a God-fearing man?' And you will say, 'He is evil. He is the spawn of Ahriman.' After that, you can ask me whatever you desire. Slaves, a throne, a seal of authority, a crown." Bahram replied, "I shall say that he is 100 times worse than you have said." And in this way, Hormozd sought for some excuse to ruin Saveh, even though he was a nobleman and had been a favorite of Hormozd's illustrious father. When dawn's ivory veil appeared and the sun rose in the sign of the twins, the king sat on his ivory throne, above which was suspended his precious crown. The nobility of Iran presented themselves at court, and when the chancellor drew back the curtain, they went in together to the king, with Bahram, Mahan, and Saveh among them. One by one they sat according to their rank, and a number of them stood before the king. Hormozd said to Bahram Mahan, "This Saveh who is here at this audience, is he worthy of his wealth, or is he an extortionate man? Someone with an evil character does not deserve to be wealthy." Bahram Mahan knew what the king's question meant. He knew its root and branch. He understood that Saveh was already a man to be mourned, and that he would receive nothing but a tomb without so much as a shroud from the king. He answered, "Your Majesty, think nothing of Saveh. He is the cause of Iran's ruin, and would that his body had neither marrow nor skin to it. His talk is a slander which is used to stir up quarrels." When Saveh heard these words, he said to him, "We are old friends. Don't vilify me in this way. Don't make common cause with demons like this. What have you seen in me, either in word or deed, since we've been friends, which is the work of Ahriman?" Bahram Mahan answered him, "You will be the first to harvest the seeds you have sown in this world, and this fire you lit will give you back nothing but black smoke. When Kesra summoned you and me to sit before his throne with the priest Borzojma and the noble courtier Izad Gashap, he asked of us who was worthy of the crown, who had the divine fire, whether his older or younger son was more worthy of the crown, and to which of them he should give it. We all stood and answered him together, saying, 'This prince, who was born of a Turk, is not worthy of the throne, and no one wants him as king. He is descended from the emperor of China, and has an evil nature in his face, and stature he looks like his mother. But you said that Hormozd was worthy to be king. Well, this is the reward you receive from that worthy man. This is why I have spoken against you and cursed you.'" Hormozd shrank back in shame when he heard this man's true words. In the darkness of the night he had both men sent to his prisons, and muttered angrily against them. On the third night, when the moon rose above the mountains, the king got rid of Saveh. He had him killed in the thieves' prison, but all that he gained by this was sorrow and curses. Learning of this honorable man's death, Bahram Mahan sent a message to the king. "Your crown is higher than the moon's sphere. You know how hard I have tried to keep your secrets, and that before that noble king, your father, I always spoke in your favor. If you summon me to your throne, I shall give you some advice that will benefit Iran and keep those who are wise safe from harm." Hormozd sent one of his confidants to fetch Bahram to the court in the darkness of the night, and the king spoke kindly to him, then said, "Tell me what this advice is, which will improve my fortunes." Bahram answered, I have seen a simple black chest in the king's treasury. Within it there is a casket, and within that there is a document written in Persian on white silk, and it is this on which the Persians' hopes depend. It is written in the hand of your father, the great king, and you should look at it. Hormozd sent someone to the treasury, saying, Search among my father's treasures for a simple sealed chest. On the seal is the name Nashin Ravin. May his soul live eternally. Find it quickly, and bring it to me here in the darkness of the night. The treasurer hurried to find the chest, and ran with it to the king. With its seal still intact, the king broke the seal, repeatedly invoking the name of Nashin Ravan as he did so. He looked in the chest and hurriedly pulled out a sheet of silk. Then he stared at the words that Nashin Ravan had written there. For 12 long years, unequaled among men, Hormozd will rule this land as king. But then disturbances will fill the world. His name will be obscured and lose its former fame. Foes will attack, and one will prove to be an evil, a malignant enemy. The forces of Hormozd will flee and fail. His rival will dethrone him and prevail. His wife will put out his eyes, and mourners' cry will rise above his body to the skies. When Hormozd saw this message in his father's handwriting, he was terrified and tore the silk in pieces. His face turned pale, and his eyes filled with bitter tears. To Bahram he said, You live by doing evil. What did you want to do with this document? Tear the head from my body? Bahram said to him, You are born of a Turkish woman, and you can never be sated with bloodshed. Your ancestry is from the emperors of China, not from Kekobad. Even though Kesra bestowed the crown on you, Hormozd knew that if this man stayed alive, he would need no prompting to shed his king's blood. Hearing these unwelcome words, he had Bahram taken back to the prison. On the next night, when the moon rose above the mountains, the executioner killed him in the prison. Now, there were no wise advisers or priests left in his court. When Hormozd had reigned for 10 years, voices rose against him in every country. Saveh Shah advanced from Herat with elephants, war drums, wealth, and an army. To number his troops, count to 1,400 times. He had 1,200 war elephants, and you would say there was no way left back unblocked on the earth. From the plain to Herat to Mavred, the land was filled with his warriors, as dense as warp woven with weft. He marched on Marv, and the letter disappeared beneath the dust raised by his troops. He wrote a letter to Hormozd saying, Gather your armies, and make a way for us. Provide us with foraging, and remember our swords. I wish to travel through your kingdom. My troops cover the rivers, the mountains, and the plains. When the king read this letter, he grew pale at the thought of such an immense army. And from the opposite direction, the emperor of Byzantium led his army toward Persia, subduing the land as he did so. The Byzantine army was 100,000 strong, and included the renowned warlike cavalry that they recovered the territory called Kesa Navan, which Nashin Ravin had conquered. From every country, armies led by famous noblemen were approaching. An army came from Kaza, and the land on their route was blackened by the mass of men. They were led by an experienced warrior, Bedel, who marched with his own wealth and men and overran the countryside from Armenia to Ardabil. And an innumerable army came from Arabia, led by young, proud riders like Abbas and Hamza. As they came, they plundered the land that had provided Hormozd with regular tax revenues. They reached the Euphrates and left not a blade of grass still growing in the province. Hormozd's days grew dark as messages came in from his forces, and this once flourishing king seemed to wither away. He sent out messengers summoning the Persian nobility to his palace, laid the private information he had gathered before them, and said, No one can remember a time when Iran has been attacked by so many different armies. The nobles were perplexed as to what to do and made various suggestions. Then they said, "You are a clever and capable monarch. Listen to our opinion in this matter. You are a wise king, and we are only your subjects. We don't think of ourselves as learned people. You must consider what is to be done and who can be our country's savior." The priest who served Hormozd as vizier said, "Your Majesty, you are knowledgeable, and you accept knowledgeable advice. If the army from Kaza attacks, we will make short work of them. We can parley with the Byzantium Romans, and we utterly destroyed the Arabs. My heart has no fear of Arabs. It hurts the eyes just to look at them. They eat snakes and lizards, and they have no skill at fighting. It's Saveh Shah you should be worried about. He's the real threat to us. Troubles come to us from the road of Khorasan, where our armies and wealth are being destroyed. When the Turks cross the Oxus and attack, we should respond without delay." Hormozd asked the priest how he thought they should deal with Saveh Shah. The priest replied, "Prepare your army, since it's an army that gives a king confidence. Summon the keeper of the muster rolls and have him tell you how many men under your arms you have." The keeper brought in the rolls. The army came to 100,000 men, and this number included both infantry and cavalry. The priest said, "With an army like this, we need not worry about Saveh Shah. If you act chivalrously and righteously and avoid all evil, you will be able to save your subjects as a king should." The king said, "The Byzantium emperor will not try to attack us. I'll return him the cities of Nush and Ravan conquered, and he'll go back to where he came from." He found an envoy who was both a warrior and a scribe, a wise, eloquent, and clever man, and instructed him, "Tell the emperor, I no longer require tribute from Byzantium, and that if he wishes to prosper, he should not set foot on Persian soil." As soon as the envoy passed on the king's message, the emperor returned to Byzantium and gave up all thoughts of war. Hormozd also sent an army commanded by the splendid and just warrior Korad against the forces of Khazar. When they reached Armenia, the enemy blocked their way and gave battle. The Persians killed a great number of them and brought back large amounts of plunder from the area. Once Hormozd knew that Korad and his armies were victorious, he concentrated all his thoughts on the one remaining problem, Saveh Shah. Now, the king had a wise and contented servant called Nashtu, who said to the king, "May you live forever, and may evil always be far from you. You should ask Mehran-Setad what he remembers of former days. He sits in a corner conning the Zendavesta. He's grown old and weak and has no hopes in the world now. I recently spent a day and a night with him and told him about Saveh Shah, his war elephants, and his huge army. But when he answered me, he spoke only of former times. I asked him what he remembered, and he said that he would tell what he knew if the king of the world asked him." The king immediately sent a courtier, who brought the old man in a litter to the king. When the old man entered, his heart filled with wisdom, his head with talk. Hormozd asked him what he remembered about the warlike Turks. "Your Majesty, you are eloquent and eager to learn." Mehran-Setad said, "When the Emperor of China sent your mother to Persia, I went with 160 brave warriors to ask for her hand. Your father was a wise and just king, and he didn't want the daughter of some concubine. He said to me, 'Ask only for the daughter of the empress. A servant's child would not be suitable for our court.' I went to the emperor and greeted him. He had 5 daughters, all as lovely as the spring, all tints and scents and beauties they were. He sent me to his harem. They had the girls' faces up and put chaplets of rose in their hair, all except for your mother, who wore nothing on her head and had none of the bracelets and necklaces and jewels that the other girls were wearing. She was the only one who was the empress's daughter, and she was the one who had no makeup on or finery on. Her mother really loved her and was tormenting herself with the thought of her daughter going off to some distant land. She didn't want to endure having to say goodbye to her, and when she left the emperor's palace, I chose her out of all the emperor's daughters, and I didn't so much as glance at the others. The emperor told me to choose another one, saying all 5 were good, accomplished girls, but I said that she was the one I had to have, and that it would be my ruin if I chose a different one. Then he called all his learned counselors, and when they had knelt before his throne, he asked them to cast his daughter's horoscope to see what the stars held in store for her. One of his astrologers said, "May you see nothing but good and hear nothing but righteousness. A child like a raging lion will be born from this girl, and the Persian king, tall and strong-armed, in bravery like a lion, and in generosity like a rain cloud. He will be black-eyed, quick to anger, and impatient, and when his father dies, he will become king. He will use up much of his father's wealth, but few enough of his days will be spent in evil. Then a fierce king will arise and attack with an army of Turks, intending to overrun Persia and the Yemen. The Persian king will fear him and his victories, but the king will have a subject living far away, a proud, loyal horseman, tall and wiry, his head covered in black curls, talkative and a large nose, dark-skinned, quick and fierce in his quarrels. This ambitious man will be named Shahnameh, and he will be descended from champions. This subject of the king's will bring his armies to the court slowly, but suddenly attack the Turks and break their army's power. I've never seen a happier man than the Emperor of China when he had heard the astrologer out. He gave his daughter, who was the crown of all his daughters, to Nushan-Ravan, and as the king's representative, I accepted her and started on my homeward journey. He gave us so many jewels that we had difficulty transporting them. He came with us as far as the Oxus, and there placed his beloved child in a boat, and then he turned back from his shore, his heart filled with sorrow at parting from her. Now I have told the king all that I saw. Search your country for this man, and tell your envoy to hurry, because the king's victories are in his hands. Don't entrust this matter to anyone else, friend or foe." When he had said this, his spirit left his body, and the whole company wept for him. The king was astonished, and bitter tears rained down from his eyelashes. He said to the Persian there, "Mehran-Setad remembered these true accounts, and when he had told them to me, he died, entrusting his soul to God. I am grateful to God that I have learned from this old man such pressing news. Search among our nobility and the commoners too until you find the man he spoke of. Do your utmost to find him." Among his listeners was a well-known nobleman who was in charge of the king's stables. His name was Rad Farrokh, and he lived only to serve the king. He came to the king and said, "In my opinion, the description this praiseworthy sage gave fits Bahram, the son of Bahram, who was Goshap's son. He's a fine, proud horseman. I have not seen a more able lord of the marches riding in the plains. You gave him Barda and Artabil to rule, and he has become a great warrior there with his drums and cavalry." Hormozd sent for Bahram and had him told of Mehran-Setad's prediction. The ambitious chieftain hurried from Barda with his warriors, and as soon as he arrived, Hormozd had him admitted into his presence. Bahram looked at Hormozd's face and greeted him respectfully. The king gazed at him a while and formed a good opinion of what he saw. He saw the attributes that Mehran-Setad had described. He smiled, and his face relaxed again. Then he questioned him and made much of him, and had a fine building set aside for him to stay in. The next morning, when night laid aside its musky cloak, and the sun showed her face, the lord of the marches made his way to the court, and the nobles opened a way for him. The king called Bahram forward and sat him on a throne in front of the other courtiers. He questioned him about Saveh Shah, and he said, "Should I make peace with him, or send an army to confront him?" The warrior answered, "Making peace is not the way to deal with Saveh Shah. If he's determined on war, trying to make peace will only lead to your destruction. A malignant man will become more audacious when he sees you have no stomach to fight. If you stick to feasting when you should be fighting, one of your subjects will take over this realm. Hormozd asked, Then what should we do? Wait or march against him? Bahram replied, It's a good omen if this malcontent acts unjustly, because justice and injustice can't be together in one place. Attack this evil enemy. Bring water to quench his fire. If you don't, the ancient heavens will choose a new ruler here. If we use the strength and skills we have, God will not reproach us, and we shall not be ashamed when heroes ask us about our deeds. If there were only 10,000 Persians left alive and we fled from battle, those enemies who love to find fault with you would say that you ran away without fighting. If we can rain down arrows on the enemy and make our bows like the clouds in spring, if 100,000 maces and swords are shattered in the lines of battle, and still we are not victorious and must despair our fortunes, then will be the time to obey the enemy, when we have neither mind nor soul nor bodies left to us. When the king heard Bahram's words, he laughed, and the throne seemed to shine with splendor. The courtiers left the king's presence, and their hearts were filled with anxiety. They said to Bahram, When the king questions you, don't be so foolhardy in your answers. Saveh Shah has such a huge army with him that not an ant or mosquito can find its way through such a mass of men. After the things you said in front of the king, who will dare to lead our armies? But Bahram said to him, My lords, if the king commands, I am ready to lead our armies. The king's spies immediately went to Hormozd and told him what Bahram had said, adding 10 new words for every one he'd spoken. And here is where I end my tale for today. But I'll be back tomorrow with more tales. Many more tales. Until then, my friends.